Hello, my name is Robert Teester, and I have been a psychotherapist and a committed meditator for over 35 years. And for the last 10 years, I've been a meditation teacher. And this talk is a part of a series on the cultivation of wisdom. And today's talk is about the differences between pain and suffering. Many people use those two terms interchangeably, but this is actually not the proper use of those terms. Pain and suffering are different. Everybody knows what it feels like to be in pain, and everybody knows when they're suffering. However, pain can be physical pain, and pain can be emotional or even spiritual. There's levels of pain that we are aware of, and there's also levels of pain that we have chosen to look away from, so they are in our subconscious but also unconscious. And this is where being in therapy, or having a mentor, or having a spiritual teacher, or somebody, a good friend that can guide us into our psychological material, this is generally where we have to start exploring, is in the subconscious. Sometimes we are quite aware of what's hurting us, and sometimes we're not. So this talk is going to be in regard to these two areas of both suffering and pain. Now I'm going to talk about pain, and I'm not going to get too far into physical pain. Everybody knows when they're in physical pain, if you break your leg and so forth, and we get medical attention. However, I'm going to focus mostly on psychological pain, which could be emotional, or it could be spiritual pain, which is a deeper kind of pain that we may not be aware of. It can also be a philosophical type of pain. The philosophers talk about the existential pain of living a life and having to make choices, and the responsibility of living a moral life and so forth. But we're going to talk mostly around the emotional and psychological pain. The pain that many people have, if your heart's been broken and so forth, we feel betrayed, and we feel like nobody cares for us, and we don't feel seen in our wounded places. Carl Jung defined a neurotic symptom as legitimate pain which I refuse to experience, meaning he's saying that we've shoved it down into the subconscious or the unconscious, and we don't allow it back up into consciousness. But in the process of psychotherapy or mentoring or any kind of inner work, we have to start encountering that kind of material. So if you don't do that, let me just say this, if you don't do that, you will have to have a certain amount of addictions that are floating around in your life. And one of the things that you can consider is try to list your top 3 to 5 addictions. How is it that you avoid the deeper part of your being, and then try to realistically look at those. So if you're drinking alcohol, if you're doing drugs, or if you're doing overeating, or over-sexualized, or overworking, or buying material possessions on a sort of a chronic basis. All those are just a few of the addictions of the mind. The mind is the predecessor, so if you want to avoid your material, your psychological, emotional material, then it's endless forms of avoidance. But this catches up with us. When we're in our 20s, of course, we can become quite dramatic in terms of the avoidance, so that because we're usually in the mating ritual of some form, and then also trying to establish a career. But these things wait for us, and in our 30s and 40s and so forth, they can lead to divorces, and they can lead to all kinds of emotional problems later on. So we have to have a vehicle somehow in our life to where we start turning inwardly. And the famed mythologist Joseph Campbell, he delineated the hero's search to turn inwardly. He used all of the consolidated all of the religions of the world into a quest by the hero to find some inner kind of peace and some kind of inner happiness and hope that it's not just endlessly suffering. So Joseph Campbell is significant, and if you have the chance to get to a library, most libraries carry complete or pretty complete DVD sections of his talks, and I highly recommend them. But the basic theme is that the hero tries to go on to an inner journey to discover the truth, and is encountered by demons inside and dragons and so forth in the mythological sense. As he tries to go inwardly, he's chased back out, and he tries again and he gets chased back out by these various things. The demons and dragons really are just us and our own emotional material that becomes painful. So it's a form of pain when we go inside, and it starts hurting, and it becomes eventually unbearable for us. I mean, some people can weep and they cry and so forth a little bit, but to deeply connect with it oftentimes is the outward manifestation of that is that we cry, we feel sad, and we feel lonely, and we feel overwhelmed, and we can actually get into cycles of weeping. We can do that with our support system, usually with friends that we have had for a long time, but generally speaking, in the predominant culture, that's not acceptable most of the time, and that's why people need to turn to addictions to numb that out. But this is not a good choice, and if you ever have been in therapy or thinking about it, one of the things your therapist will talk to you about is what your addictions are, and then try to not stop them, but start reducing them. So you drink less or you do less drugs, and then you turn that awareness from the outside world to the inner world, and you start moving that psychological emotional material into the consultation room with your therapist, and you build a trusting relationship where you can start revealing some of this emotional material. And this takes time. It's been the metaphor used oftentimes in psychology is that we're like an onion, and we have to peel these layers back one by one, and it takes time. It takes 1, 2, 3, 4 years. If a therapist knows these stages of 1-year client and a 2-year client, 3 years, because the material that you go into gets deeper, and the healing process takes about 3 to 4 years to get down to early childhood. See, you're working backwards as the onion peels. You're working actually back towards in your early childhood, and depth psychology understands pretty clearly that most of our wounds the emotional wounds and psychological wounds come out of early childhood, from 0 until 5, and after that we just keep repeating that pattern in the world after that. So you try to peel it back piece by piece, and then work backwards in a therapeutic environment, tightly bound in therapeutic relationship, because you're not going to go into a lot of deep pain by yourself, and it's too much to ask of your spouse and your friends to do that, because it's too difficult. They don't know how to do it, and they're going to start cutting off and trying to go, shh, don't bother with it, or here's, take a drink or something. They're not going to do it either. They just can't do it. Unless, of course, they have been to therapy and they have done it. But that's not fair to ask your friend to be your therapist, or your spouse, or your children, by the way. Don't make the mistake of having your children be your therapist. And a lot of people do that, and that's not the proper way to do it. That really harms the child. So here's what the point of this talk is. That's emotional pain. Having a divorce in your family, having a parent that's drinking, or being shouted at, or being emotionally abused, sexually abused. There's 1,000 different ways of abuse or neglect, but basically when it comes right down to it, we don't feel, as a child, early childhood especially, we don't feel seen, and we don't feel heard by the people that we depend on for love and affection. So if your parents are wounded, which they are, and if you're your mother has parents who she feels wounded by, and your father has a mom and a dad, and he might feel wounded by them. He may not know. Parents sometimes don't know. They won't admit it. They buried it. They're on their path of being a parent themselves, and they are they're raising their children, and they're working hard. And so they may not know, but they're wounded too. So in Jungian psychology, Jung says, well, we all carry a mother wound, and we all carry a father wound. If we had a mother and a father, which we do, and whether they're there or not, we carry different wounds from both of them, because they come from different families. See, the wound goes back into family generations on both sides. So in order to heal that, you have to go inside and face that stuff yourself in a therapeutic relationship, and that would be the point of doing psychotherapy. Now, if you don't do that, now here's the difference between pain and suffering. If you don't just go into that kind of material, then you are on a path of suffering, because suffering means you're avoiding that kind of work. So if you decided that you're not going to do that, you're going to stay like a functioning alcoholic or a sex addict or a workaholic, and that's what typically men do if they have difficulty emotionally, is that they work harder. But if there's some kind of psychological choice, like, okay, I'm not going to touch that material, and I'm going to just live my life out until I die, in quiet desperation, as it's talked about by the monks, that is not pain, that is suffering. The avoidance of the pain is suffering. So remember Jung's definition. He says, I'm in legitimate pain, but I refuse to experience it. That leads to endless suffering, because it becomes endless hurting that never gets addressed. So those are the differences between pain and suffering. So legitimate pain, as Jung says, is legitimized. It's there, it's real. You may not have a handle on it. You may just feel angry, you may feel sad, you may feel depressed, or you have difficulty with different kinds of personalities inside you that aren't integrated too well. Those are all symptoms that these things need to be addressed and talked about and felt, and cry if you need to, weep if you need to. That's how you generally access deeper feelings. You may not even remember some things, but if you go down emotionally into this material, it unfolds by itself. And in a therapeutic relationship, your therapist is holding a loving container that you trust, and you can go into early childhood and deal with these emotional wounds directly. And you will heal, even though during the difficult parts of it you feel like you're falling apart or coming apart, because you're in two places at one time. You're an adult in the world, but you're also a hurt, 6-year-old little kid somewhere, or some age like that. Those are the two things I wanted to clear up in this talk today. The difference between suffering and pain. Pain, legitimate pain, is there. It's fine to work it through. It's your guidepost, and it's good that it's there, because that's what you're looking for when you're doing inner work. You keep going down deeper and deeper levels, and it's the pain that is telling you that you're going in the right direction. It's hurting in there. Go in there and be with that part of you. And oftentimes we use the metaphor of a hurt little child hiding, feeling scared, and find a little place a little nook or cranny to hide behind so you don't get hurt anymore. And that's what you're looking for. You see, you were that little boy or that little girl. You go find that little boy or that little girl in there, and when you touch that little boy and little girl, then you hold that little child in you until you heal, and then you go to the next level after that. So it's a continual process of unfolding in this way. There's nothing wrong with that. That's how you heal. That's how we all heal. It's like having a broken leg. We go to the doctor, we get a cast on it, it heals, and then we work our way out of that healthy wise, physical therapy. So it isn't any different with emotional pain. You have to go into it, you have to touch it, you have to breathe into it, and let that fill up your body, fill up your psyche, and you will take your life back, because when you do that kind of work, creativity and clarity and the mystery returns, and you start healing, and the further you go, the more you will heal. And there is a final place in that. It's not endless. Believe me, even though when you're in it you think it is, it's not. There is an end to it, and that's in the final stages of work. If you don't do it, then you're on a path of suffering, and that's endless. Believe me, you can't get away from it, and you're going to be hurting your whole life like that, avoiding that kind of work. So I encourage you to contemplate the difference between pain and suffering, and choose to get into therapy or a life coach or mentoring relationship, or a relationship with your pastor, and start working through that material, and expect it to last X number of years. So, but that is the only hope to work through this, is that way. You can't just drink, and you can't carry on socially and just laugh about it. It's something that you must do, and I strongly encourage you to contemplate what I'm saying. It can change your life. So this is a talk on pain and suffering, and as part of a series that I'll be talking about called the Cultivation of Wisdom. And so this is an important one, and please consider it and contemplate on it, and adjust your life to start working internally. Thank you.